So tonight presenting, we have Willy Manigat. He enters his second season at the helm of Brock men's basketball team. Last season, he took the team to a 12-10 regular season while appearing as high as number 7 in the country and led them to a playoff appearance. Prior to joining the Brock Badgers, Manigat was the lead assistant for the Carleton Ravens men's basketball team. During his team with the Carleton staff, Manigat won 2 national titles, adding to the 3 titles he won as a player at Carleton. In addition to his work with the Ravens, Manigat served as associate head coach of Ottawa Prep School Canada Top Flight Academy for 3 years, where he won back-to-back national championships. Born in Montreal and raised in Ottawa, the former point guard played for the University of Ottawa GGs for 2 seasons before transferring to Carleton. After a successful university career where he finished as an OUA All-Star, Manigat spent 4 years playing professionally in Canada, Germany, Morocco, and Croatia. This past summer, Manigat served as assistant coach to the Niagara River Lions in the CEBL Summer Series. We also have with us Margot Page. Margot brings a wealth of knowledge to the Brock program, both as a player and a coach. She played for the Canadian national women's ice hockey team from 1989 to 1994, winning 3 gold medals at the IIHF Women's World Hockey Championship. She has also coached the national women's under-22 team, leading them to gold medals at the 2003 and 2004 Air Canada Cup and 2010 MLP Cup. In addition, she was the assistant coach on the women's national team from 2004 to 2006 and was part of the gold medal winning coaching staff at the 2006 Winter Olympic Games in Torino, Italy. Previous to the Winter Games, Page won a silver medal at the 2005 IIHF Women's World Championships and was part of the coaching staff that claimed gold at the 2004 and 2005 Nations Cup, 4 Nations Cups. She was also the coach for the NCAA Division I Niagara Purple Eagles women's ice hockey team for 10 seasons. Thank you both for being with us here today.
No problem. Glad to be here.
So let's have a blast. If all the viewers can enter in the chat your name, city and town, and the sport and age that you coach.
I guess everybody's shy.
Sorry, we have an athlete's view from Paige Cahoon of the Brock women's hockey team. She says, your team genuinely becomes your second family, and when you don't see your family every day, sometimes a slight drift can occur. We also have a view from Daniel Caldwell of the Brock men's basketball team. He said, the lockdowns have separated us, and although we take opportunities to bond together individually through forms of virtual communication, it's not the same.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you on behalf of Margot and myself for coming here this evening and spending some time with us and taking a look back at this past year and the madness that it's turned out to be. Ironically, we are in March right now and we are currently looking and being fascinated through March Madness and what's going on in the basketball world. But to start the night, we thought it would be important to just take a look back at what the pandemic season was for us at the university level and somewhat at the club level, because some of us have some affiliation with clubs as well in the Niagara region. And what a normal off season for the men's basketball program would normally be would be March, our season ends, a national championship winner is crowned. And for a lot of coaches, those next few weeks are really spent recruiting. So for myself, before the pandemic, I would have gone to Halifax and attended the Officer Championships here in Ontario in order to kind of put together a new program. And just to give everybody some back knowledge about my situation, like Hazel, who alluded to at the beginning in her introduction, the last year would have been my first year taking over the Brock's men's basketball program and trying to turn the program around and build a new culture and take over the program and lead it towards a consistent OUA contender and eventually a U Sports contender. So after the season ended, I was focused on looking at new recruits. So went to Halifax, I went to different tournaments in Ontario, I went to Ottawa, I went here in Burlington where the Officers Championships were in order to find new prospects. And during that time, our guys would get normally a couple of weeks off after the season just to recover and let their body heal up. And in April, as their focuses turned to exams and finishing out the academic season strongly, we'd also be having some skill sessions, some individual sessions, just to keep them somewhat in shape and also allow them to have a break from their studies so that they have something to look at outside of just their books all the time. So that's usually what our April would look like. And then the biggest part of the season for me, in terms of the way that I approach building a program and building our players and making sure they have success on the floor, is actually being able to spend the months of May and August to look forward to some skill development. I always say, from my standpoint, that players are built in the off season and teams are built during the season. So my focus in the off season from May to August is really spending time with the players and coming up with a plan for their development and how they can kind of shore up some of the holes that they have in their basketball game in order to have them be prepared to be the best version of themselves once we start putting all of the pieces together for a regular season. So being that I got the job in July 2019, I didn't have a chance to have an off season or to recruit. And I was really excited about the opportunity to do both of those things and to have a full off season with my guys and the guys that we kept on board. And that's usually what an off season for us would look like. And for, as you guys know, obviously the pandemic hit. So for us during the pandemic this year was actually about, when the pandemic actually happened, it was mid-March. I had just gotten back, like I said, from some recruiting trips, and we were having end of the year meetings with all of our players. Like I said, I inherited a lot of our players and provided them all a fair opportunity in that first year to kind of prove that they belonged and were buying into what our culture was going to be and our expectations as a program. And honestly, while we were having those end of the year meetings, that got cut short and we weren't actually able to finish all those meetings. Some of them had to actually move online. And at the time, Zoom, Life Size, Teams, Google Meets, whatever it is means that you use for your online meetings that we're now all experts in, I actually had to do most of my meetings either over the phone or FaceTime because I still wasn't quite familiar with some of those apps or platforms. So I actually had to end those meetings and do them all online. I remember we were in the middle of one of our end of the year meetings with one of our players where our athletic director, Emily Allen, came into the office and said, everybody has to evacuate. You won't be coming back to your office. And at the time, truth be told, a lot of people, like, we weren't really sure what COVID was. And we thought, okay, we'll be gone from here, maybe for a couple of weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. At the time, high school students were actually going into their March break. So we thought, you know what, it's probably just a safe precaution in order to get through March break. But as we all know, that wasn't the case. And our off season ended up being essentially putting together strength and conditioning programs for our players online, meeting with our strength and conditioning staff, a couple times a week, like I want to say 3 or 4 times a week. Because we didn't have access to seeing our players in the gym, what I did is I actually went to a park and recorded myself doing different ball handling, skill development, form shooting drills, and putting together these videos for my players, filming myself. And the one thing that we did add is having film sessions online. In basketball, we're pretty lucky that we have access to a platform called Synergy, and Synergy allows us to watch basketball from college all the way through to the pros and the NBA, both in Europe and in the NBA. And essentially, we started making assignments in groups in order to keep our players connected and also to try to develop their IQ for the game of basketball. So that's what our offseason ended up looking last year when everything came down with the pandemic, which was far from what I expected and was excited to. Even this morning, I had a meeting with our strength and conditioning staff, and I was laughing at the fact that I'm going into my third season come September, and I still haven't had a full off season with my players, the players that I both recruited and kept. And quite frankly, with the way things are still progressing, I'm not sure I will this summer either. So it's kind of funny at the same time, but we're making do where we can in order to continue to progress with our players. And Margot, maybe you want to share kind of what your off season looked like last year, or when the pandemic started?
Yeah, thanks, Willie. And again, thanks for everybody for attending. Ours is pretty similar to what the men's basketball was from a regular off season. The only difference is our kids go home for the most part and they start working. So they're really working full time, and they are doing their strength and conditioning and their off ice skills and things like that on their own through one of our team builder programs, and we do check-ins and stuff like that. Because of the pandemic, it was almost like the polar opposite. They were sent home. It was like a flurry of activity, coming and grabbing their equipment and going back home, hoping they could maybe skate at home, and flights out and everything like that. And then we were, our administration said, hey, you guys really need to touch base a lot with them. And in our summer, like, my athletes were going, why are you like always planning all this stuff for us? Like, we've got jobs, we got this. So we actually had to have them buy into the fact that we're going to do more in the summer than we would in a regular off season to connect with them. And it was more from a mental health standpoint and making sure that they understood everything, a knowledge standpoint, not necessarily, hey, we're going to practice. Like, ice is expensive. I'm a women's hockey coach, so it's not like you can just go out and rent some ice and go out and try your skills. You have to be creative and just do them out in the parking lot and stuff like that. So it was kind of interesting where it was a little bit polar opposite from the men's basketball stuff during the pandemic part of it. So, but I think both Willie and I will agree is when we talk about the hard skills, which is our next slide, there were some really easy ones to really face during the pandemic. Like, I think as soon as the pandemic hits, we're like, okay, what can we do? And all of a sudden you see a whole whack of skills coaches start going virtually, and there's a whole bunch of strength and conditioning going virtually. The easy things for us as coaches to be able to ensure our athletes were doing were the strength and conditioning, the skill development, and having team meetings. Those were really easy. The more difficult ones were kind of what Willie had alluded to in the first part of it, was sort of the individual and team tactics. Once you start not just doing your own skill work, but you start adding people to it, and you're wanting to reemphasize your systems. And video tasks was the best way to do it, to try and get your students being students of the game. Watching any kind of sport on TV, watching videos of yourself that perhaps your coaches have had, but it's really hard. And so was the attention to detail and evaluating the progress of your athletes and your team. That was so difficult because you were looking at just stuff on a piece of paper, so to speak, like in one of our apps, as to what they've done, but you don't know if they're getting stronger. You don't know if they're getting fitter to that extent. You don't know how their tactics are, their system play, and their understanding of different things like forechecks and defensive zone coverages and things like that. So that was the hard part from our end of things, is to be able to try and transition, and how can you make them better students of the game, not just better in skill. And Willie, if you would like to add to any of that.
Yeah, and I think like Margot said, it's about, as a coach, you're always trying to find a tangible way for you to actually evaluate and know that your players are on the right path from a tactics standpoint and skill development standpoint, but as well as your team as a whole, that there's a bit of cohesion and guys are meshing and gelling together and understanding what we're doing and what our goal from a tactical standpoint is. And some of that you can only really do on the floor. And I think that's what Margot is alluding to, is that that was one of the hardest things to kind of evaluate it and make sure that that's going in the right direction, especially after spending so much time during the season and leading up to that and keeping a continuity in that sense. For us today, obviously everybody here on this call comes from a different background. I think one of the biggest things that coaches face is we all figured out, I think we can all say, through skill development, we all figured out the hard skills and how to somewhat make our players better and to not have them miss out on a year of development from that standpoint. But I think we can all agree that the soft skills in coaching and in culture building were some of the hardest things that each one of us had to find a way to do and to get through to our players. And from my standpoint and from Margot's standpoint, these are some of the soft skills that we want to talk about. I think we'll emphasize some more points in the next few slides, in the next few minutes, about some of the ones that we thought are super important in our position. But I think everybody at all levels of coaching can relate to this, and even in people that are building culture in office space, in all walks of life, that's any type of team concept, is just making sure that the people that are part of your team from a mental health awareness standpoint are just in a good spot. And I think you can understand for athletes the importance of the game of basketball or hockey or the sport that they play, that for them to get at the university level or even at the club level in high school or prep, it's a part of their life. And just in a blink of an eye and a snap of a finger, all of that is removed from them. So, how do you stay on top of our players from that standpoint? From a team standpoint, again, motivating and keeping your players focused. And again, during a season, it's very easy to work towards a goal because you're together all the time, where during a season or in the off season or during a COVID year, now all of a sudden it's really hard for players to stay focused on what they're doing and not have a real kind of, again, tangible touch point where it's like, okay, this is the goal we're working with. And keeping your players accountable. How do you keep your players accountable when you see them less and there are less touch points? As someone, for me, in my shoes, setting and keeping your team culture and identity. Like I said, I came in after a year where the team had an interim coach. I inherited a lot of players, and I'm coming in as a fresh face, the third coach in 3 years for this program. How do you build an identity and culture? And I spent most of my first year trying to do that. Well, in a COVID year, how do you sustain that and remind people what your identity and your culture is about? Communication, including both at the youth and club level with players and parents. I am the director of a club here in Niagara called Niagara Basketball United, an initiative that we just recently started, and actually started through COVID. We had planned for it before COVID, but it actually came to fruition in COVID. How do you keep the communication going for parents and players in a time like this? And while you're doing that, also build the relationships, because for me, relationships are key to everything. Anybody who's ever met me, I don't know if there's anyone on the call that knows me, I do value relationships and getting to know the people that I'm working with. So how in a pandemic year do you develop and focus on some of the soft skills? And what Margot and I decided to do today is to just pick 3 of those points you see listed here and to talk about them and to expound on them and to have an open discussion with you guys. So at any point, if you guys feel free, please add anything in the chat that you have any questions about, and we'd be more than happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, thanks, Willie. So the one that kind of, for our team, was the height was mental health awareness. Like, their mental health really took a toll. It wasn't so much in the first part of the off season, so the March, April, May, June, July. It was more towards the August. They're not here back at school yet, and they're making decisions to come back to school, coming to an environment that they know there's going to be COVID, that they may have to live a certain way because they're in bubbles. They had to live in bubbles. But they also knew that if they stayed home, they may not get the opportunity to be able to train properly and possibly go on the ice. They may not be as disciplined by the fact that they're with their teammates and they can be structured enough to work, whereas at home it might, continue on where they're working and whatever else. So that kind of stress level already happened. And then they got here and the world changed in the way that they learned. And I think everybody was in an adjustment period. Profs, everybody just started piling stuff on them. And I'm sure for a bunch of you coaches that are coaching at the youth level, it was the same thing. All of a sudden, teachers are having these expectations and you're trying to do stuff from home and things are trying to get done. You're trying to keep them busy. It's the same thing that was happening here. Is we thought more was better. And it was a really tough go because so much was piled on, especially academically for them. Profs did not adjust well, in my opinion, to be able to work with them in that kind of frame initially. Just like as coaches, we didn't. We were like, okay, let's try and do as much as possible. And they needed sort of a step back. With that, I think I needed to start thinking their world. Like I needed to say, okay, I have to think like a student athlete. So I started working out with them. I started doing everything with them and sort of tried to schedule my own work with stuff so that I started showing my vulnerability to them as well. And they really appreciated that. I think they got to know me better, felt more comfortable about expressing how they were feeling. I also had a really big discussion constantly on a weekly basis of our needs being met or not met for them. And it could be for anything. And one of the biggest things I kept saying to them is don't romanticize the grind. Like don't even think that when I say, hey guys, we're going to have this, that you have to take it as you have to attend or you have to do that. I didn't want anybody to sit there going, oh my gosh, like even in our world now, oh gosh, I'm so busy. Oh gosh, I have to do this. Oh yeah. Oh, I'm tired. It's almost like we romanticize that. We're so tired and we have no other time to do anything. And that's a good thing. Well, it's not. I realized that really quickly. And we have on our team, and some people don't like this, but there is nothing that's mandatory on our team. Nothing. Everything, it's expected. If you're going to be committed to this team, it's expected you're on the team, but it's not mandatory. So if someone can't come because they're feeling down, they just go, listen, coach, I can't do it today. I'm just going to stay home because I'm stressed about my academics. I'm going to work on my group project. Okay, thank you. No questions. There's nothing that is mandatory. And it took quite an adjustment over the last couple of years, but it's worked. And it's worked because they feel comfortable to express themselves. They feel empowered to express themselves. They feel that they can make good decisions. These are adults, they're not going to be professional hockey players that's going to be their career, unfortunately, maybe in the next 20 years, perhaps, but that's not where it's at. So we didn't have that romanticize the grind thing. We really made sure, and it became real in November. In November, that is when we were told we would have no season whatsoever, no games. So at the start, they were just adjusting to all the craziness. We were setting goals. We were doing all this stuff. And then November came and the OUA and U Sports said, we're done. We're not having. So you're just practicing all season. So that was a whole other thing. The kids said it got real. And you could really tell that they were suffering and they were quite upset by that. And at that point in time. The other thing that was expressed, and there's positives coming out of this, believe it or not, because those are some of the negative things, but some of the positives were we had them really start focusing on more opportunity. What do we have the opportunity to do right now? And we have the opportunity to get better. We have an extended season, right? We can start goal setting and start seeing what we want to do next year. We have all this extra stuff we can try with strength and conditioning. I had some players, their skating edge work, non-existent, the way that they handled the puck, non-existent. So we could really hammer in and make them better players. One player, her name's Bailey Brooks, expressed to us about what real, I said, like, how's it going? Like, you're looking really good on the ice. You're really trained a lot. She goes, yeah. She goes, I worked hard in the off season. She goes, but you know what I think it is, coach? She goes, I think it's because there is no real competition, and I don't have to work hard to perform for you day in and day out, trying to get a spot on the lineup for the next game. I'm just here and I'm wanting to get better. And she goes, it's been a really good reality check for me of why I play. And to me, that was a huge thing to hear, because you should always feel that way. So to me, that's a red flag where now I gotta work hard on, yes, you still have to understand the competition needed to be able to get yourself into the lineup, but it was hurting her so bad that it was a performance inhibitor. So we needed to make sure that that wasn't happening. So it was really interesting. But the other positives are, I can't believe the adaptability of our players now and the resilience I'm seeing, which I haven't seen in the past. In the past, gosh, if we missed a cutoff to a game, they'd be freaking out. We're going to be late, and, you know, oh, warm-up's going to be this. And now I'm like, hey, guys, we got to do this, this, and this now. And it could be like a big thing. And they're like, okay, coach, no problem. Boom, done. Like, it's unbelievable. So for me, those are the things that there's a positive and there's a negative to it. That the negative, obviously, like, there was increased anxiety. You can't see it as much, so you're checking in with them all the time. But honestly, if there was any focus done for our team, it was on mental health awareness and really doing the check-ins and making sure that they're okay. Willie?
Yeah, and from a standpoint of mental health awareness, the only thing I would add to what Margot has said for coaches here listening is, I think sometimes as coaches, especially the coaches that really take their coaching and what they bring to these players' lives seriously, is usually for someone like myself, before a practice, after a practice, I'm always talking to my players, and it's easy when you see them every day to be able to stay on top of their mental health and be like, you seem off today. What's going on? And I think what Margot and I quickly realized, I know even early in COVID, before we got back on campus, what I had is a schedule where I was actually talking to my players almost on a schedule where it's like, okay, half of the group I'm talking on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the other half Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and on Sunday, I'm sending a quick text to everybody just to see how their weekend's going. So never lose sight of that piece of it, that you are in a lot of ways a checkpoint for your athletes in terms of their mental health and how they're feeling about this life and the sport and school and whatever the case may be, and not to lose track of that in these times. And it's a perfect segue for the next piece that we felt is a huge component that has taken a huge hit during the pandemic, and is how to stay from a communication standpoint, active with all of the stakeholders and people that are a part of your team. So one of the big things for me, like I just said, is the contact points with your players. When you're in university, these players walk the halls. So you have them for practice. You have them for skill development sessions during the year, probably a couple of times during the week outside of practice time. They come to your office. You have office meetings. And like I said, with me and my players, anytime a player has an off day or something seems off, whether it's the energy at practice, the type of practice they had, or the type of practice I want them to have, I'm constantly talking to our players before practice, after practice. Any opportunity I get to speak to a player, I take it. If I run into them on campus, I don't just walk by them and wave. I stop, I say hello, we talk about what they're doing, what they're up to. So when you have that many opportunities, not to mention film sessions, scouting sessions, when you have that many opportunities to speak to your athletes, you develop relationships with those guys. And anybody was in the Brock offices last year used to call my office almost like the party, where sometimes I'd have to kick the players out because the relationships were so important to me that guys started to feel very comfortable coming to our office and being able to just chat with the coaches and myself and my lead assistant and just see how our days were going. So losing those contact points really forced me last year to actually, like I said, build a schedule and be able to communicate with our guys and make sure that they're okay and they know that we're still out there, and it's not just during the virtual strength and conditioning sessions or the virtual skill development or whatever they're doing, that they were constantly reminded that they had a coach and a coaching staff that cared about them and wanted to see them succeed, not only on the court, but also in the classroom and even in their personal lives. Like the ones that have relationships, whether it's a girlfriend or a boyfriend, that we're constantly talking to them and just letting them know, hey, how's that going? Are you good? Just, be kind to them, whatever the case may be, just giving them real life advice. And again, for me, with even the contact point with my coaches, I was pretty fortunate when I took over the program that my lead assistant, which is my go-to guy, my right-hand man, I was able to actually bring him from Ottawa with me, and with someone that I had a pre-existing relationship with. So, but even in that case, with us, we would spend from 8 o'clock in the morning and most nights until at least 7 or 8 p.m. at night. We'd just be in the office or at practice or skill development session with our players, just constantly talking about our program, our needs, what we need to work on, what we need to improve, what players to look out for, and what are they doing, or just any tidbit that we can have and advantages that we can gain through a season. So we'd spend almost 12 hours a day together in an office, and then COVID hits, and all of a sudden that is left to phone calls and talking 3 hours on the phone a day. But even at that, there's less communication, there's less conversation about just any and everything, which helps you build your team and your culture. And that's just from the standpoint of my lead assistant. And I think everybody here can agree that in sport in Canada, a lot of the coaches that are present in sport at all levels, a lot of them are volunteers. So while I was fortunate to have a guy that kind of knew me before and knew what I was trying to build, and felt like very much like he was a head coach as well of the program, I also had 2 or 3 assistant coaches that were brand new to me, that I don't get access to as much, that I was trying to teach them about what we want to do from a culture standpoint and teach them about what we want to do from a tactical standpoint. How do you do that through COVID? Was extremely difficult, but again, communicating with those coaches and finding a way to build those relationships. Like I said, relationships for me are the most important thing in everything. And that was probably one of the hardest things I had to do, is continue that communication with some of my assistants and to keep them feeling engaged. And again, when you're a volunteer coach, you want to feel like you're part of something, or else what's the point? Why are you here? And are you really valued? One of the other pieces is finding ways for our players and for each other to get in touch with each other, to talk, to check in. So I constantly reached out to some of our leaders and making sure, hey, you should probably check in on this guy, making sure you guys are actually having conversation, starting a group chat and being more active in the group chat, sending quotes, sending videos, things that are funny, just any type of way to keep the communication going and have players feel like they are a part of something. Like one of the biggest things, like I've been like pretty fortunate to have success both as a player and as a coach, where I've won a few national championships. And I can tell you now from my playing days, both professionally and at the youth sports level, I don't remember a single practice. I don't remember any of the national games that I played, or national championship games that I played, what happened in the first quarter, what shot did I hit. What I do remember is the relationships that were built in the locker room. I can tell you a bunch of stories that happened in the locker room, or when guys were out together, or guys were at practice, when we were training together. I can spend all day and all night talking about those things, but I can't talk about what actually transpired in those games, when we had a lead, when we lost a lead, how we came back. None of that mattered. It was literally the relationships that we built from within. And so coming from that and having experienced that, that's always something that is big for me in our program, is making sure that the players are taking care of each other and holding themselves accountable and doing those types of things in order to have a relationship. Because at the end of the day, basketball ends for everybody, sports ends for everyone. But I can look back at a bunch of my closest friends today, and those are guys that I just went to war with, and our locker room and our touch points were what built our friendship. And then Margot alluded to this previously before, but just again, keeping up with our players and their needs. Again, like I said, as a coach, you're constantly seeing your players, and it's easy to see when they need something, and they feel more comfortable when they see you every day to come in your office and, hey coach, I'm having trouble with this class, can I get a tutor, Coach, I'm struggling with this. Can you do this? Coach, I'm looking for summer employment. Can you help me with this? But now when you're not actually just running and those things aren't happening in a natural form, you have to seek them out and make sure that that communication piece, and that you're not, you know, missing out on any of the struggles that they have. Because at the end of the day, as coaches, that's what we're here for, is to be a resource and to be a mentor to those student athletes. And that's something that is done through communication. So that's been a really important piece and a hard piece that that COVID has brought. But I've been, again, like I said, I'm lucky that I have a lead assistant that really understands these things and helps me in that communication piece and helps me fill the gaps that I may miss, because my head is on, my mind, I should say, is more focused on bigger picture and how to continue to grow and build our program and our brand. And again, those are all the things that are huge pieces of, you know, building culture. And how do you do that without being able to communicate with your athletes as much as you normally would, or your coaching staff, or even your strength and conditioning and your therapist? And how do you continue to build those relationships to make them feel like they're part of a bigger puzzle, and that there's something for them to be gained from their volunteer hours and the sacrifices that they're making on their end. So communication and finding a way to communicate is a huge thing. And even for us at the club level with our club program, Niagara Basketball United, I've had a lot of parent meetings just to keep them in the loop in terms of just, hey, this is where we're at with COVID. This is what we're planning. This is the program we're planning when we're able to get out of lockdown, when we're going back into a lockdown, in order to just be able to communicate with our players from the grades from grade 5s to grade 12. We started doing online sessions just so that we have a touch point and make them feel like they're a part of something. So communicating is a huge piece of relationship building. And in COVID, that's been one of the soft skills that has gone a little bit awry. And I think is super important for us as coaches to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and just same lines as Willy, like I relied upon every single person on our staff and on our leadership group with our players. Like I would have my equipment manager involved, my therapist, our strength and conditioning, our leadership group, which is our captains, even though we don't have any captains named right now. Our first years coming in and being mentored by second years, I relied upon everybody as the contact points. And you're starting to see that if you don't have communication, effective communication, you're not going to have that mental health awareness, and vice versa. You need to make sure you start seeing that everything's kind of linked together. And the final link is that team identity and culture. So the team identity and culture is a soft skill that I feel so badly for you, Willy, because I've been working on setting our team identity and culture and just trying to flip it from when I took over, and I think I'm in my 5th year now, sort of even though one of them's COVID, but at least I had a few years to come in and sort of set my foot down a little bit as to what our vision was and what the expectations of behavior and character were, and be able to recruit some of that in. Oh my gosh.
Painful progress, Margot, I won't lie.
Yeah, it's a tough goal, because we just started seeing the fruits of our labor this year when the pandemic actually hit, where we're like, oh, we're so excited about this team because it's the identity and culture that finally is happening. And then we're in COVID, so now we can't see it, right? But that's all par for the course. So really, the identity and culture is the way you live as a team. And as a staff, like I'm very hard on my staff as well, is we live this as well. We really try and keep that firm. So the way you live as a team, and in my opinion, your team values should not change, but the way you look like in this environment might, right? So your values aren't going to change, but what those values look like now in the Zoom world or the life size world, it might look a little bit different. Biggest thing is team buy-in. You have to make sure that you're selling it to your team and that you're living it because you believe in it. It has to be coming from you and your team. needs to be player-led, which means you need to have that group that is willing to stand up for what's right. And it's not a matter of you got to do this and you got to do that. It's a matter of, what the expectation is inside you. We really worked on empowering our team. Again, as I talked earlier in the webinar, we talked about the accountability parts of things where everything's expected, but nothing's mandatory, right? And people being really honest. And Willy, when I first told him this about how I run my team, he kind of raised his eyebrows a little going, oh, that's interesting. And it was a matter of, you eventually see the ones who, no matter what, they're the character people and they are there for you. Those are the ones you want to go to war with. And they're there for you no matter what. And then you start seeing the other ones going, oh, well, I have to do this, or I have to go work, or I have to, and eventually you start seeing the pecking order of who are your leaders and who has the buy-in and where do we need to work. Again, I don't think it's the way for everybody. It is something that's uncomfortable for the players initially because they have to make decisions and it could affect them to a certain extent. Not from playing time or anything, but from someone getting better and being more committed and taking over their spot. So it's a kind of an interesting little dynamic happening there. But we worked on empowering them. Team activities, huge. I wouldn't do too many of them because our kids were, I don't know, they're playing this Dinosaurus thing, one thing on Life Size. I don't know, it's some sort of app game, but they would do Zoom activities. We have a Team Achieve Kit, a development challenged teammate, and they did so many wonderful things, organizing things, because she had a really tough time being in COVID and not being able to see our players and couldn't understand it. They would create these team videos and send them to them. Share time. Every time we had a meeting, we said, okay, first 10 minutes is all share time. And at the first part of every time, I tried to at least bring in something to share, something not hockey necessarily related, but something you could celebrate or you're down about, or something that's happened in your life you want to share. And it was crickets at the start. Now, whenever we have a team meeting and I go, okay, guys, who's got anything to share? All of a sudden you see all the virtual hands raise up in the air and people are like, hey, yeah, my dog, I finally got my dog to sit, just like little things like that started showing the stuff. But everything for me became a teachable, coachable moment, right? It became something where if we were physically together here right now, would that action, that behavior, or that way of expressing yourself be a part of our identity and culture? And every single time, if something came up, even if we had 3 or 4 late on a Zoom call by 1 minute, oh, sorry, I was running around and then I couldn't get on. Well, would that be acceptable if we were physically together? No, coach. Okay, well, let's get better at it, so everything became a teachable, coachable moment. I was pretty relentless with it because I think you have to be relentless at the start to be able to, and I made sure that my staff, all of them, coaches, everybody, were that way as well, so that the expectations were still there and maintained. Because if you let it slack because of COVID, it's not a reason, it's an excuse. And we have to really make sure that, no matter what, our values are still there. And so we were on top of things quite a bit, and it was fatiguing. It was so fatiguing, just trying to catch them on a Zoom call or not handing in some sort of technical, tactical task, or when I said I'm going to call them and they're like, well, just a minute, I have to finish up another call. Just things like that where it was like, no, would we be doing that? Would that be acceptable if we were together? So those were the moments we talked about in the way of identity and culture. And we've been pretty good at being able to maintain it. But I think what will show is what happens once we get back together again. And do we have to reteach that part of it or not, or reinforce it? Willy?
Yeah, and I agree with Margot from the standpoint is we're now looking, and it's ironic that we're sitting here talking about this on this evening, and we're now a year almost into this progress. And I can honestly say it has been exhausting because it's been constantly thinking on your feet and being ready to adapt and to figure out ways and making sure that you're catching as much of the red flag in order to build your culture, because culture is one of those things. It's my assistant coach always describes culture, even from as a Canadian standpoint, is when you walk into a room, you can feel a team's culture. When you cross the border from here and go over to the US, there's something in the air the second you cross the border that changes, a feeling that changes when you cross that border. And for us, it's constantly being on top of that culture. And more importantly, in these times, empowering, like Margot said, our players to lead that culture. For example, when we were doing our film sessions during the summer, we would meet as a team where we would discuss tactics and our spacing, whatever the case may be. And then we'd break them off into groups and have them lead their own little pods where we'd have 4 groups that are player-led so that they can build and hold people accountable. They're setting meeting times and keeping guys and reporting back to me, okay, this is what happened. Well, did you feel comfortable with what happened in that meeting? When that guy showed up late, were you happy about it? Now that you're in a position of leading, how do you feel when someone is not paying attention when you're speaking or when you're trying to do something and volunteering your time to do? So trying to empower the players to almost become the coaches, and for us to do to just support them and help them through that process. I always say with my players, our season and our team will only be as successful as they are. My job is to be the captain of the ship, but they are essentially the ones piloting the ship, and my job is just to make sure we don't run into any glaciers or get off course. And in the COVID year, it's been more important than ever to empower these players and to make the activities also fun, but also maintaining the expectations. Like, I've never played music in a practice in my life before, but now when our guys are working out, I'll throw some music on so that this feels like something that they're excited about, and there's a little bit of joy, and it's not too serious in a year where they're not really competing. Those were the main skills that we had today that we wanted to talk about. But at this time, we'd love to open up the floor for questions, any comments, things that you guys have in terms of your dealings, because I know we have coaches at various levels, and how do you do different things at different level, and some of the challenges that you guys have endured through COVID, and hoping that Margot and I can share some light or some advice on possible solutions to those issues.
So I can share some questions that have come up in the chat. So Steve asked, Margot and Willy, how have you handled making sure your student athletes weren't struggling with their mental health? So you've somewhat answered that, given that you're not seeing them in person on a daily basis.
Yeah, like, I'm happy to answer that, Willy. Like, honestly, it was huge check-ins, pretty much. It was, but our relationship was pretty tight. So we would constantly be talking, but we wouldn't just say, hey, how are you doing? We would be probing, how are you sleeping? Yeah, is your sleep okay? Physically, you know, I've been looking at your team builder and you're missing stuff. What's going on there? How's your family? How are your academics going? And then slowly you start seeing some consistencies and inconsistencies. So it was kind of probing deeper into just how are you doing? It's finding those questions when you're talking with them to see how they're doing. And you can still also, when you're having conversations, I preferred not the phone, you know, because I'm very much a face-to-face coach. Players know I'll go into their world with the text stuff, you know, if they text each other, I'll go into their world for simple things. But if it's something pretty serious, they know they have to come see me. And they've been wonderful about it. That's sort of one of my own culture things and identity things as well. So Zoom calls or life-size calls, you could actually see it. But I really thought about questions that would trigger perhaps some emotions where, you know, and it was personal stuff. It was, how's the family? I heard your dog was sick, or I heard your mom had a baby, you know, how's it going? Like, I just continually ask questions.
Yeah, and I would just add to that one thing. I did the exact same thing, and I know what I'm about to say. Margot does as well. Is sometimes too is just building the relationships also with your support staff. Like at Brock, we're lucky where we have an amazing strength and conditioning staff, and some of those players on those staffs are also peers that are also student trainers, and building a relationship with those student trainers too, because they pick up on stuff that maybe the players in this time, because you don't see them as much, they're more relaxed in the presence of people their age, and making sure that in our meetings, weekly meetings, that we're checking, hey, did anybody catch anything with anyone? Is there anybody that you guys feel like you're not sure, but there seems to be something off, even in the way that they lift, they train? You know, it's easy for basketball players and hockey players to show up at the rink or out on the court and perform because that's what they've done their whole life. But when you're in your strength and conditioning session, based on your effort in those situations, you pick up on a lot of things. And sometimes as coaches, we're not privy. So one thing that I've always done is with my athletic trainers, our therapists, our strength and conditioning staff, to have them be on the lookout, especially in a COVID year, for those cues that the players would sometimes hide from us, because they think that sometimes players think that they putting additional stuff on our plate and don't want to bug us as coaches. And that's where the other relationships that they have are so integral and so important.
Okay, so we have another question for Margot. It says, did you use video in helping your players improve their hockey sense? And if so, what tool were you using?
Yeah, the tool I was using was my awesome assistant coach named Josh Mallory. he's wonderful. So he couldn't be here with us, so he is actually doing some things, and we created a bunch of different little tasks for them to do. But one task that we kind of liked for them to watch video. Our team was not great at watching a ton of hockey and being students of the game unless it was us showing them videos. So we thought this was a great time to start creating some things and having them love the game from watching it standpoint. So we created some little tasks, like the last one that Josh is just finishing up on that he's sending feedback to, is they had to take an NHL player or an NWHL player or a PWHPA player. And those are all like one NHL, you may be familiar with it, not sure, but that's the men's professional league. The other professional leagues are the women's, and they were actually playing and had tapes. So we actually had them, they could choose a player that they feel they were similar to, watch a game or two, and then summarize similarities, differences, how they could get better, the player, and how themselves could get better. So that was one little thing. And then they would send it in to us and we would give feedback. Josh has also done a really good job at just every so often throwing tidbits out on our team app. We have an app just for our team, and throwing stuff out there, and, you know, every couple weeks, and just showing things and that sort of thing. So we did bring a lot of video in, from that standpoint, but it wasn't just video for video. It was more, how can we keep them motivated, keep them focused with some neat plays and things like that.
Okay, good answer. So Jesse asked, I'm curious what other terms we could use to describe soft skills. And then Corliss said life skills. So I'm assuming that's an answer to that question, but do you have any other answers or suggestions?
No, we just use soft skills. Just, you know, I've heard of soft skills. It could be my age, maybe. I don't know. The things that people tend to forget about. They're all gung-ho on making sure the puck handling or ball handling is to a T, and a lot of times they forget about teaching leadership and teaching some of those things. So yeah, like life skills could be a great good title for that completely. I just use soft skills because it's a forgotten thing.
So another question is, despite all the negatives this past year, are there any tools, things you've learned that you'll use moving forward as you play, hopefully, as it returns to normal?
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly and just, I think this season, what I would say I've learned the most, and I think Margot alluded to that earlier in some of her point, is that from an adaptability standpoint, our players are so much stronger than we believe in terms of what they can handle. I oftentimes, when speaking to peers and other people that are asking me how's the season going, I truthfully say, like, I feel like our players are handling this season better than I am as a coach. And I understand that it's different for me because I'm trying to build a culture, and I come from a winning program, and I'm trying to build a winner here at Brock. But sometimes our players, they can handle so much more. And I've never been as proud of the group that we have right now out of any of the groups that I've even won championships with, because of what I've witnessed them go through and how they've come out of it. Like, even right now, we just got back into the gym after not being there since the Christmas break before their last exam. And our players are super pumped, they're super attentive, they're excited, they're paying attention, they're holding each other accountable. So I think the biggest thing I've learned is that there's room to trust them and to put more on their plate, and that they are willing and able to accept those challenges, and that also will help them become better leaders and better men on and off the floor. And I think that's one of the things that I'm learning, is that there's more trust to be had with them.
Yeah, from my standpoint, I've probably learned more than I haven't. Like, it's been an incredible thing for me to develop as a coach. I always want to keep learning, you know, like, I've learned to think outside the box. How else can I get this done? Like, I will now definitely use like Life Size and Zoom and those sorts of formats instead of just calling a kid up, you know, like I'll be using all of that. Like, I've really understood balance between development and winning. Like, it's made me a better coach. Like, I've had to show my vulnerability to my players through this whole year. The more human element, that relationship part of things. It's more like the people before the skills and drills, right? Like, I do care about winning, absolutely, but you're not going to be able to do it if you don't have empowered athletes. Like, you're not going to have it. If you can empower them, the sky's the limit with your team. If you trust them, believe in them, and have great relationships with them, man, not only are you going to have a better team, but you're going to have a ton more fun. Like, you're just going to enjoy it that much more. They buy into it. They love it. They want to be a part of it.
Agreed. I definitely second that.
So we have one more question. It's from Sarah. She said, are there any supports/resources that have helped you or would have helped you better navigate this last year? For example, from the athletic department director, peer coaches, education, training programs?
It would have been nice to go call someone up and go, hey, Grandma, I've got this hockey team. You've been through a pandemic. What did you do? You know, but that didn't happen. So for me, it was I leaned on my other coaches. Like, Willy, what's going on? I need to talk to you about stuff. Like, our resources were our coaches, other coaches in the group. I thought our athletic department, like Emily Allen and the other administrators, did a great job of meeting weekly and keeping us updated and keeping us connected through this. So that was really, really beneficial. So, like, no, but I also know that I started reaching out to resources that were around there. Like, I don't know, if anybody coaches like 6, 7, 8-year-olds, who would you go to for help in the way of resources? Well, I'd go to a kindergarten teacher. Like, why wouldn't you go to, you know, and it's the same thing here as who would I go to? I started calling some youth coaches and seeing what they did as some of the drills and some of the skill coaches to be able to say, how am I going to do this with these guys? Like, I have to get back to the basics with them. So again, it's just thinking outside the box, but it's made me a better coach in that way. And some of the resources, you just have to think, okay, we started using sports psychologists at Brock. We used Phil Sullivan and some of his master sports psychologists students, and they were wonderful. They're working on goal setting with our athletes through a pandemic, where they started off goal setting with, okay, we have a season in January, to, no, we don't. We are going till next September, maybe. So they've worked on goal setting with our group, and that's something they're just doing to help us. Like, that was a great resource that we had. So you just start saying, okay, how can I get help here, and how can I help as well?
Yeah, and I think from my standpoint, I feel like I'm just repeating myself. Everyone's going to leave this webinar saying Willy only talks about relationships, but for me, it's everything. And I think as a coach, I've always taken pride in my relationships and building relationships all over. So again, those relationships in a pandemic, you can pick up your phone and call a ton of people. Like Margot said, call our fellow coaches here at Brock. I called professional coaches that I worked with. I was able to coach professionally last year. I talked to players that I've worked and developed that are playing professionally in Europe and all over the world, seeing how they're dealing with things from a player standpoint. Talk to guys who work with the national team. What are you guys doing over there? Talk to fellow coaches that we coach again during the year, from guys out west to out east in Ontario. Hey, what are you doing over there? What do you want? Like, this is what I'm struggling with. How are you going about it? And not being, and again, like Margot talked about vulnerability. I think for so many years as coaches, we've kind of kept everything close to the chest and always had something up our sleeves. This was the first year where I really took the sleeves off, cut them off, and kind of let myself be vulnerable and not being afraid to tell another coach what we were up to, in order to either help them or to have them give me feedback as to what I can do differently, because it wasn't about winning and losing. It was about servicing our athletes and servicing our community. And I did that both at the youth sports OUA level with Brock, but also with our new program, Niagara Basketball United, to make sure that, we were doing the right thing by our club and doing what we could do to service this region, which was a huge part of why I took this job in the first place.
So we have another question. It says, how are you keeping players and yourselves motivated when the finish line keeps seeming to be getting further away?
What's the end goal is always what I talk about. That's always how I've lived my life, even as a player, a former player, now a coach, is what's the end goal. And my end goal when I recruit a student athlete is for them to have ultimate success and to have them leave our program and be real men that can make a difference in society and that have learned more about themselves in their years with us than they have their whole entire life. So I think that's what motivates me, is that, I look at myself as a father figure to all these kids that I come across. And if they can leave and still feel like, my coach is invested in my development both on and off the floor, then that's what has always motivated me. And I always thought a lot of it was motivated by the winning and wanting to win championships. And you know what? This year has been, obviously it's not what you expect, but I've been able to still stay motivated and build, because we as a team and the players are motivated, and I see their energy and I see their passion for the game, and it's my job to carry that passion through and to have them have a lasting impression of what their time at Brock was. So for me, that's been my motivation right now, is just doing it for those guys, the guys that I sat in their living rooms or on the phone with their parents and them, telling them that Brock was the choice for them, and it's my duty to continue to do that.
Yeah, it's so hard with the line being pushed back, and we don't even know where the heck the line is right now and when we're going to start, right? So I think that's the difficult one. And for me, I'm a very self-motivated person, and I too want to have strong, confident, empowered young women leaving our program. But our players do look at, they want to play. They want to have a season, they want to play, and they want to be ready, and they want to be good, and they want to win. So again, it's that development, that balance. But I find that no matter how I come in, as long as you have a core group of people that are going to push for you and are going to want stuff and are demonstrating that in the weight room and on the ice or on the Zoom calls and are doing it, they are the link to your success. If you have a really good core group of people that are going to stand up for what your identity and your culture are, the motivation part continues. Like, they're doing some of the stuff behind the scenes. I'm like, hey, like, I heard you did this. They went, oh yeah, we did that. Like, I'm like, oh my God, you guys are amazing. So, but that core group of people, if you can find out who they are, those are the ones that are going to lead your team and keep them motivated and focused. You're going to have your little step backs. That's going to happen. That's natural. That's human. But it's a matter of, okay, we've had a little setback. exams or whatever, so we haven't done anything last week. Let's get back at it. And it's that core group that's going to do it for you.
So it doesn't look like we have any more questions at this time. So I just want to thank you, Margot and Willy, for participating in this webinar, and I want to thank everyone else for attending it. If you have any further questions, feel free to send it to the Center for Sport Capacity email, and we can pass it along to either Margot or Willy or both. And then we can post their answers onto the CSC website. And we'll also be posting this webinar after it's done. So thanks everyone again for participating today.
Great. Thanks, Willy. Thanks, Hazel.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks to all the people that attended.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Bye.